Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Stay Home with Leica. My name is Tom Smith. I am the director of the Leica Academy, and it's a pleasure to have you all with us. Please sit back, get comfortable, get ready for a great conversation. Beyond the Single Frame is the title of our program, and we are joined today by two Washington, D.C. based photojournalists, Hector Emanuel and Michael Robinson Chávez. Michael, welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here. Hello, everybody.
I see. We got Hector with us as well, perhaps.
Yeah, here I am.
All right. Good. All right.
We made it.
Thank you. Thank you both for doing this, guys. I hope you are doing well. We're going to jump into a lot of work, but most importantly, I hope to make this a conversation. Let me know, for people who don't already know a little bit about you, I want to jump right in with Hector. Hector, you were born in Peru, and though you have traveled a great deal, much of your photography as a documentary photographer has focused on social and environmental issues, primarily in Latin America and the relationship between Latin America and the United States. And you've done a number of projects that we'll look at in terms of documenting traditional cultures and festivals in Peru. The World Press Photo Awards recognized your work in Colombia and the civil unrest in Colombia. And you've also been recognized by the NPPA, the National Press Photographers Association, among other groups, for your work on the Pine Ridge Reservation. And Michael, you have had, you already had won a 3 World Robert F. Kennedy Awards for photojournalism. You have worked for the LA Times, the Boston Globe, and now you're a staff photographer at the Washington Post. But even with those awards and all the travel you've done over 70 countries in your 25 years as a photojournalist, 2020 without, it wouldn't be an understatement to say that it's been a very good year. You have recently been awarded a Pulitzer as a part of a team at the Washington Post documenting climate change.
Yes, thank you.
And that focus of climate change has really goes back to your time at the LA Times covering the drought in this picture here.
Yeah, it's been something we've been doing for quite some time, and sadly, I think it's work we'll be doing for a long time to come.
And not just abroad, but also looking at both urban and rural issues with climate change and economics have also been themes that have returned again and again in your work.
Yeah, definitely. This actually, the photograph you're showing right here from Montana was something that we were working on, about how these rural communities are vanishing in many parts of the United States, in the plains, in the mountains. This was Geraldine, Montana, which was some of the best people I've ever met. And it was based on a 6-man football team because they simply don't have the population to have 11 people play football. So it was a championship game, but we went beyond that to talk about schools shutting down, libraries shutting down, and how far out some of the kids have to go, busing for hours to get to school, what school that's actually open. So it was speaking to a lot about the depopulation happening in rural parts of America.
Well, I mentioned that you guys are both based in DC, and that you have worked over 20 years as photojournalists. And so one of the things I would like to accomplish with this program today is to start a conversation between the two of you, and also invite the audience to send us in your questions as this conversation continues. And like I said, we'll take a pause about halfway through and answer those. But Michael and Hector, I asked you to look back through your archive and find some turning points, right?
Yeah.
And Michael, if you can start us off, tell us the story behind this picture.
Well, this is an interesting story because I was working at the Boston Globe for about 4.5 years, close to 5 years. And I went to a National Association of Hispanic Journalists conference in Miami. And I brought my portfolio with me because they were having some of the best editors in the country there to look at work. So I met with an editor, his name is Joe Elbert, and he was the director of photography at the Washington Post. And Joe is a unique individual, definitely. And so I sat down with him and I showed him my pictures, and I had worked from a few different places in the world, mostly from the New England area. And he's going through it. Yeah, right, seen it, boring. Yeah, right. I would just throw this out. I was being raked over the coals, essentially. And then he stopped and got to this photograph. And he looked at this photograph and he said, "This is a marvelous picture. How old are you?" And I told him how old. I think I was 29 at the time or something. And he says, "Okay, let's stay in touch. I want you to stay in touch with me." And this picture was the one that eventually got me a job at the Washington Post, my first tour at the Post. And so for me, it became a very important picture. And this was made in northern Peru along the coast in a town called Santa Rosa. And it's just people waiting for a bus that at this time, this is 1996 or 7, I made this photo. So they're waiting for a bus that may or may not show up. So they're hanging out on the corner there. And I used an M6 with a 35 on it. I was shooting it probably f/16. And I just saw this happening. And then this person popped out in that window that you see in the center of the frame. I'm like, oh my goodness. And then that dog showed up. I'm like, oh, the dog has positioned itself perfectly. Like, and everything just started.
And by the way, as a Peruvian, this picture couldn't be any more Peru. I mean, this is a corner in Peru. Like, you see this thing, there's pictures that you're not sure where they are. This is Peru.
This is coastal. And so I made the picture, and it was something that Joe really loved. He loved the layering going on. He loved all the intricacies happening within the photograph. And so for me, this was a very important picture for my career and for the way I saw things. And it was, I was shooting with the rangefinder, which kind of also changed the way I saw moments and situations in front of me. Because
very good. Well, we're gonna get into that a little deeper in terms of why Leica. But I want to give Hector same idea here. How was this? Tell us about this project.
So this is from Pine Ridge Indian Reservation. This was an assignment for the Washington Post Sunday magazine. They gave me 7 days to go. It was part of a bigger story on Russell Means, who was a Native American activist. And so they gave me 7 days. I ended up staying, I think, 10 to 12, just because I can't go all the way to Pine Ridge Indian Reservation and not do more work. But to me, like, the turning point was like, before this, I had met Antoine Dagata, who's a photographer for Magnum. He had sort of looked at my work from Colombia. He was like, this is all great. This is great journalism, but you're not getting deeper. You're not getting closer. And I think Pine Ridge was the first assignment that I went with a purpose of like focusing and really, really getting into the story, really getting to know people individually and really spending time with everybody. Because sometimes you go to places, you don't have enough time and you're running in and out. And I felt like this was like, I was really going to slow down. This is all square format, but I shot it with a Leica M8, which I had just gotten. And that was part of also me, like, for a few years between my M6 and then having to shoot digital for work, I was not shooting Leicas until the M8 came out. And that was something that's a photographer, like, it was nice to be able to shoot with a rangefinder, slow down a little bit too. And also, get back to getting close to the subject. So really getting to know people and getting like more personal, more intimate view. And I think this to me, my work from here on was very different.
Well, it's got a lot of poetry going on. That's what I love about photographs. They're just like really, really pretty moments, just very lyrical, really nice.
Right. And I guess that's one of the things that I started focusing more on, how a story, the feeling of a story, more than just like this are the facts of a story. I wanted to go beyond just like, this is what's going on. I wanted to go, this is what it feels like to be somewhere. This is what it feels like, for not necessarily for the people in some ways. I can't speak for them, but that's what it felt like for me, like to be there.
Yeah, Hector, in your bio, on your website, if you want to convey a sense of emotion of what it's like to be there, the feeling of being in a place.
Well, because like, as you shoot the news and you shoot a lot of things, there's plenty of images today. Like, we don't all need to document, this sort of straightforward, this is what's going on. Sometimes some people need to step back or step in deeper and give you like another sense for a story. And for me, the emotional connection, the emotional sense of the feel of somewhere, like to feel what it's like to be somewhere. Inside a house, this is a house with like 17 people lived. It was a little ranch house with 2 bedrooms. That man who was slightly younger than me was the oldest, and there was a newborn baby. That's one of his granddaughters. So, to me, it was about getting close to people and getting the emotional content of the story. Because, especially when Michael and I work for publications, there's great journalists that are writing with us. They're writing great stories. And they're telling you all kinds of stuff. So like, in a way, like, we want to give you a different sense of what you can read. That's an emotional content.
in our prep, I had written a note about talking about people's misconceptions about journalism, and that's one of them. I think is that oftentimes a photojournalist is thought as being a one-woman, a one-man band out there, but it really is a collaborative process.
Oh, it's a
right?
collaborative thing, and starting from the editors who think of you, or you propose a story, to how they look at your story, to the writers you're working with. Like, no, it's all this stuff is much more complicated. That people, like, it's not just we're all running around, slinging around a camera, throwing it around. I know Michael does that, but other people.
Occasionally.
Yeah.
Well, so I mean, you both have spent a lot of time on the road, and I'm sure as Michael's a father, and Hector, you're married, yes?
I'm married.
Yes,
yeah.
yes. So we spend a lot of time away from family. Can you talk about that? And I know there may be a specific story here, Michael.
Yeah, I mean, it's very tough. And granted, I mean, I used to cover a lot of conflict. I did a lot of photography in the Middle East, in conflict zones, in sub-Saharan Africa, and these places. And now when my daughter was born, I really kind of curtailed that activity. I wasn't going to put myself in so much danger anymore. And I know that there's so many great photographers out there that are still covering that. And indeed, that theater has become more dangerous, which is its whole different story. But for example, this photograph here was in 2002 during the Second Intifada in the West Bank in Jenin. And like we were talking about before, it's a tremendous responsibility to go to these places and bring the reader with you, because you are going to a place that they will never want to go to or should be going to. And it's our responsibility to bring the feeling of what it's like in these places back to them. And so you have to take that very seriously when you're in these places. And this in Jenin in 2002 was on April 18th, 2002. And I remember the date specifically because my nephew was born. I became an uncle for the first time on this day, and actually received the phone call on my satellite phone in this exact location you're looking at moments after I made this photograph. So it was this intense dichotomy of life and death happening all at once. I mean, I know that sounds terribly dramatic, but it was a really, really intense moment. And so for me, this picture became very consequential, not just because of what I was seeing in front of me and the greater part of the story of the conflict, the ongoing conflict in the Middle East, but the fact that I'm there, like, happy that I'm an uncle, and at the same time surrounded by this destruction.
I mean, I think you've mentioned, Michael, in conversations we had before about that dichotomy of, sometimes you could be in a horrible place and have things that happen that you feel great. It's a weird thing that you're out there in the streets and everybody's going through this, and sometimes little things happen to you, whether it's meeting a friend that we cover at the shooting in El Paso recently together. And we met a couple of other people that are great friends, Mario Tama, and it was, in some ways, it was like, a very hard thing to cover, but we also had this moments that were really nice because the three of us were together, and Adriana, and
Yeah, and you rely on those. You rely on those to kind of help you through these things.
You need those
People
things.
often ask, how do you deal with such traumatic situations? And you deal with them with good people. This is another example of a traumatic situation. Obviously, this is in 1997 in the Democratic Republic of Congo, but days earlier, when we had entered the country, it was still Zaire. So we were following Laurent Kabila, who was marching across the country, and Mobutu Sese Seko fell in Kinshasa about a couple days before I made this photograph. And this is in a city called Bandaka, and it's along the Congo River, about near the center of the country. And I was, this was my first trip into sub-Saharan Africa, and it was hyper intense because I was taking Larium, which is an anti-malarial, and if any of you have ever taken it, it's a horrendous anti-malarial, and like no one takes it anymore.
It's no fun if you don't have to take it.
It's better to get malaria. So we were taking this, and I was nerve-wracked as it was, and then here I am in the heart of darkness, as it were. And we landed at this airport, and the back door opens up, and there are thousands of Hutu refugees that had marched for months through the jungle in Congo, just like essentially trying to get through a green wall. And they ended up in this place, and sadly, you can see some did not make it. They did not survive the journey. And they were all lined up to be repatriated back to Rwanda because things had changed in Rwanda to the point where the Hutus were being allowed back into the country. But this, again, was just a moment for me that sort of said, look, this is serious stuff. This is a real responsibility. You're not here for some thrill ride. You're here to tell these people's story and do it responsibly and with sensitivity.
It's a perfect point, and we're going to talk more about that in terms of what guides you both in these stories.
Right.
Because I knew you've known each other for close to 20 years now, I wanted to propose this idea that you would each pick one picture that you admire of the other, and we're going to show that shot now. And Hector, if we could start with you and tell us why you picked this picture of Michael's on the left.
Well, like, as you were saying earlier, Michael had, like, 2019 was his amazing year. He really produced so many images, like, and his images from Peru, like, I guess to me, they will always be, that to me is like the most Michael thing I've ever will ever see. Because also, we share the Peruvian experience, so for us that's a big thing, But when he came back one day, I think before he was showing me some of his edits before he was, like, doing the early edits, and I remember stopping at this picture. This is a picture within a picture. It's just even just a portrait of that woman without the window would have been great. But then her, framing the window, and even just, I've seen pictures people take of walls with yellow frames and a window without people. I mean, this picture has so many layers. It's just like a painting and outside, but it's a real person. And I know the difficulties that Michael had to go through just to get to this point. Because he was also telling me about the trip, and I was like, "Oh my God, you just arrived." And he looked at this thing, and I took this picture, and it's always stayed on my mind. I just think looking at this picture, the amount of layers to it is crazy, but it's just also an amazing, beautiful picture, and the color is perfect. If you're gonna shoot color, better, like, it has to be perfect color, and this is perfect.
Michael, can you share with us a little bit about this story in Siberia? And we've got a couple other pictures to look at along with it.
Well, this was a story that was part of the Pulitzer Prize winning package about climate change that the Washington Post did, and we fanned out to different parts of the world. I went to Siberia and California, and this was a Siberian part about melting permafrost and the absolute transformation it's bringing to this part of the world in Siberia. Economies are changing, demographics are changing, people are having to leave. And so it was this arduous journey to get there. I mean, it is Siberia. It's not an easy place to move around in. Trips that you would think would take hours take days. And if you're unlucky, they take weeks. So it's sort of, you never asking, when are we going to get there? It's if we're going to get there. So it was, but it was incredible. It was my first time in Russia. And the picture that Hector chose was one towards the end of the trip where on the way out of Siberia, all the flights were booked. And so the only way we could leave this town that we had been using as a base to document the permafrost melt was a 2-day boat journey in a 15-foot boat with a 1 outboard engine on it that was sort of sketchy to begin with. And for 2 days, we went down this river. And then finally, at the end of the river, we got in a car for another day to go to the Pacific coast to then fly back to Moscow. And it was on the way on that car trip through the Gulag Archipelago, as they called it, that we pulled into a roadhouse. The driver said, "I'm thirsty, I need to drink something." And we just parked, and that was right in front of me. And I was already in love with Siberia. And when I saw that, I'm just like, oh my goodness, this place is glorious. What a wonderful place. And so I just got out of the car and used the Leica Q and made the frame. And then I went inside, and the woman gave me a surly look, but she was friendly enough. And we couldn't really communicate very well, but she was lovely. And it was just, yeah, for me, it was just a reminder of such a great experience and tough, because Siberia is going through hard times right now.
Well, we'll call that out, and we are going to talk specifically about gear for anyone who wants to know what your favorite lens is and what gear you're using right now. So definitely call that out as we go. What was the gear you took to Siberia?
To Siberia, I took a Nikon Z. Can I say Nikon on this? Is that okay?
we recognize the existence of other cameras. That's okay.
Beep it out.
So I brought a Nikon Z6, and then I brought the Leica Q, and those were the two cameras I brought with me on this trip.
So
I think like 80% was shot with the Leica Q.
So Michael, this is your selection for Hector. Tell us why you picked this one.
Well, I picked this one because looking at this photograph, I love Mexico. Growing up in Southern California, Mexico is always next door. Used to be in there, go down there all the time. And I really, really love the place. And when I saw this photograph, it's also, I get to see Hector shooting in color, which is kind of, that in itself was a joy to see. It's that motion you're talking about, that moodiness, and the fact that this one was taken in Northern Virginia, wasn't it, Hector?
Dumfries, Virginia.
Yeah, so this is taken in Virginia, and for me, it's such an American experience to be transported out of Virginia and I'm in Mexico in this photograph. I am experiencing the mariachis playing. I am in Jalisco. The joy of it, the beauty of the dress. It's working on so many levels. The color, the mood, and it just, the most important thing a photograph can do, it evokes a feeling from you. It evokes, it evokes something that puts me there and I'm hearing it as well as seeing it.
And sound was, I think, a part of the title of this, Hector, right? This project?
Right. Yeah. I can't remember it, but this was done for the Washington Post Sunday magazine again, who Dudley Brooks, another great editor, for some reason thought of me when he wanted to photograph, do a story of mariachis in DC. And it was a great story. I mean, it also came at a time where people were saying all kinds of things about immigrants. So they wanted to show a different view of immigrants. And what is the U.S. really? It goes along with my American X project about it. What is America? Who are Americans? How do we define America, right? In some ways, because like Michael said, this is a very experience that you feel like you're in another country, but no, this is the U.S. This is America. This is what America experiences, right?
Absolutely.
So this was the story was about too, in a way. It was about, it's the sound, the feeling of music, but also it's a very American story, even though it could look like it's shot in Mexico.
Absolutely. Yeah. Talk about that for both of you a bit in terms of, let's see what our next image is here, but in terms of it's perfect timing, your motivation on the stories that you choose.
Well, I think honestly, the motivation, much like what Hector was talking about, oftentimes it can be topical, something that is in the news at the moment that you want to address that's important. I know for me, being a staff photographer at the Washington Post, that is important because you're addressing issues, but you also want to look ahead. You want to look, kind of forecast stories that haven't already been done. And a big part of that is looking, previewing what are trends that are happening. So for me, obviously, immigration is a topic that's of great interest for me. My mom is an immigrant from Peru. I often am drawn to working class America because I'm always astonished what people go through to make a living, to provide for their family. What is it that they have to dig in and do? And the drought in California, for example, we didn't want it to just be a story about the earth suffering through this drought, but how are people in the Central Valley of California dealing with this? The Central Valley of California is a planet apart from the rest of California. So when I went into that story, I was already thinking about, okay, what's going to be the best way to tell this story? And it was going to be through the people experiencing it, not just cracked mud in the ground or something like that, or a dead animal carcass. Right. That often hits us with drought right away. But I want to see the faces of the people who open their taps and sand comes out, who can't farm anymore. That's kind of what draws me in, is how can people, those eyes, bring us through the story?
Right.
And same
for me, you. As a freelance photographer, documentary photographer, I have to balance things because I obviously want to get jobs. So often editors will come up to me with assignments, and mostly I take them. I don't always take assignments. Depends. Sometimes I deem them too risky or things that I probably wouldn't be that good at. I look at a story, I go, well, maybe I'm not the best photographer for that. Or sometimes I just don't think it's a safe situation, or the story doesn't make sense for the amount of risk. So I won't do it. But, I tend to work on long-term projects. So then I try to propose between those long-term projects, I break it down to smaller things. So then I can propose mini stories to magazines and things.
But is the hook always the human angle for both of you? I mean, it's the impact on people that is what you're always looking for?
I've done landscape stories that are based on landscape. But it's still landscape, and always. I mean, to me, people are people. To me, my photography is mostly based on photographing people. I would say, yeah.
Well, we're gonna look at a story. I think that was one of Michael's first stories in Peru. And is this one of the first times that you worked with a Leica on this trip?
Yeah, actually, this is multiple trips. The Peru work is over many, many years. The Peru, it spans, there's a photograph in this take that I made in 1994, and there's a photograph I made in 2015. So it spans this long period of time where when I was at the Boston Globe, I mean, I was the new photographer. I had the worst shift. I was covering some of the worst assignments. It was tough. It was a tough shop to go rise through the pecking order. And so I would grab my camera and my Leica and my bag of Tri-X, and fly to Peru and go down there for weeks at a time and just work, just make photographs of the things that I saw, the people, the beauty, the landscape, the difference between the coast, jungle, and mountains, which is what Peru is really divided up into. And it was just freedom for me to go down and not worry about deadlines, not worry about a certain assignment I had to fulfill. And I went down there, and I always got a kind of a melancholy feeling about Peru, because my first trips as an adult were in 88 and 89 when the country was in disastrous shape. And so I always kind of had this dark feeling about Peru. And that's why I shot a lot of it, well, I shot it pretty much all of it in black and white. But it was just, these are just wanderings around the country. And that's primarily what I was doing, wandering up and down the coast, up into the Andes, and being invited into people's homes to some of these parties that were going on. And it was just, I was trying to express the joy of being in Peru, and Peru is a place that opened up my eyes. It was a place that rearranged me photographically. My love for travel was born in South America, and connecting with my mom's side of the family down there was all very powerful experience. So it's very personal for me, this work.
Oh, when's the last time, both of you, when's the last time you've been to Peru?
I was there just before the whole Corona thing happened. I was there in February.
Yeah, I was there last year.
I was there for a photo festival.
Yeah, and the last time I was there was in February too. Yeah, for about a week. Yeah, we were there together. Remember?
We were there. Yeah, we did see each.
I don't think you remember so well. Too many pisco sours, my friend.
Yeah.
So I want to give you guys a chance to talk about gear, mix that in here. So Michael, it was an M4P, as I understand it, was your first Leica, which you might actually have. Hang on, let's look at some gear.
This is my very first Leica right here, the M4P right here. And I bought that, and I bought a 35-1.4 and a 50, and then I moved up to the M6. So the Peru work, I was mainly done with those two camera bodies, and the 50 and the 35. The 35 on the M6, and we talked a little bit about this yesterday, I think is the greatest combination in photography. It's like in 35 millimeter photography, it is wonderful. And then with Tri-X film rated at 320. That's what I used to do. I rated at 320, and it was
D76 1:1.
D76 or HC 110.
Ooh.
Now we're getting way too geeky here, but no, it was, I love that. And then even back in the day when I was a student and I would buy the bulk loader, and I would be rolling, and then someone would come into the darkroom and start talking to me, and I'd be like, what number am I on? I'd have like 40 frames in the canister. But that was, for me, it was pure. It was something pure and joyful about it, because we all know cameras now are computers. They're computers with lenses attached to them, many of them. And for me, they're a bit overwhelming technologically. And I know they make great frames and great pictures and things. And that's why I was so happy to get back into Leica and got the Q. And the Q was this wonderful hybrid between the mirrorless cameras and the rangefinder. Because when I turn it to 35, and I'm getting a Q2 this year, when I turn it to 35, those beautiful white lines show up in the viewfinder again. And the joy of anticipating things coming in and out of the frame, and what makes a rangefinder so special, that I can use with the Q now. And so, and the rangefinder also, like, this is all with a rangefinder. I loved opening it up to 1.4 and making frames with no depth of field, with very shallow depth of field, and getting that ghostly quality that lens brought. So yeah, it really kind of, it changed the way I was making pictures. Now this is one frame. This frame is actually made with this camera right here with an FF2, because this is the one from 1994. And this was given to me on a recent trip in Panama, because I had like a maraca now, when I went through Panama to get to Venezuela to go work. And I met up with the AP writer that I used to work with 25 years ago down there. And he said, Michael, you left this in the darkroom. Here, take it back. I saved it for you. And I'm like, oh, great. And so this camera made the picture you're looking at right now. So I'm very happy to have it back.
It is one thing that it's nice when the gear comes back to you, right? From a time of separation. You are both going to be, let me tease this. You're going to be teaching a workshop for us for Leica Akademie, starting July 25th right. And running to August 15th. And the name of that workshop is Beyond the Single Frame. Can you talk about how the idea came about and what people would learn in that program?
Well, Hector and I are both, we both consider ourselves like storytellers, storytelling photographers, that the single image is a wonderful thing, a great single image. And we can think of many iconic single images through the years taken by wonderful photographers. But we have always explored and wanted to dive into the idea of having a group of photographs tell us a narrative. And there's so many different ways to tell a great story. You know, you can tell a story through still lifes, through color, through mood. As you can see, most of our work is done through people, their experiences, certain challenges they're facing, their perseverance in these challenges. So we wanted to create a workshop where we can get the students together and we can take their photography and heighten their visual awareness to tell these stories, these narratives. And it's really an experience of making those photographs fit. And big part of it is the narrative after you make the frame. So you're going to go out and shoot all these pictures. Now you have to put them together. Now we have to edit. How does one flow to the other? We have to find a narrative, sequencing. So it's a big challenge, but that's what the workshop is for, is to get people to think beyond that single image.
Right. I mean, it's a way to take your photography to another level, right? Because the street photography is fantastic. I mean, I love street photography and I love just sometimes going out and just taking pictures. But there's a thing about having to really focus and think about what you're going to do and what you're actually trying to say and will it work? And then you in some ways become a better photographer because it makes you're not planning pictures, but you're planning ideas, you're planning thoughts. You know, it's like writing a poem or like, it's a different thing. You know, you're not just like looking for little things. You're trying to create something bigger than what you could do.
Well, to that point, and I'm watching your questions, everybody. I'm going to try to weave a few of these questions in here. You would talk about photography is being like writing a poem, and many times the elements of your picture story. You know, some of those are very easily known in terms of an establishing shot,
right?
And, looking for a decisive moment. But I can tell you, as someone teaching a lot of workshops, that there are certain moments that are consistently overlooked, or certain techniques that are consistently overlooked. And I wanted to present some of those ideas with examples of your work. And the first one, and this is just a tease of a little bit that we would go into in the workshop, working with layers. Can you both share how important that is to you in using these pictures, the stories behind these pictures as examples?
Go ahead, Hector.
Okay, so for example, in this story, I was covering the conflict in Colombia, and this was a town in the border with Colombia and Ecuador called La Hormiga, I think. And it was a town that was controlled by paramilitaries, and you were not allowed to do photographs in the city. You know, you arrived in this place after many hours and many connections and many things, and then it's only to find out I even had people's group of paramilitaries stop me in the street and take some film away from me during the middle of a shoot. You know, I was photographing what I thought it was just kids playing soccer, but I don't know what I was photographing. But so I was trying to still tell the story and still the sense of, like, you know, the mystery and the danger without. So suddenly I had to still continue to shoot and do the work that I was doing. So I started going to places and trying to shoot things, you know. So this is a mirror and a window and a restaurant. So I was just trying to find, if you're telling a story, then you have to find a way to tell it, and that will make you take risk with photography. You know, you're not just out there in the street taking pictures. I would have never taken this picture if I could have been on the street doing everything I want, right? So, but I still wanted to tell a story. So once again, it's the idea of limits and storytelling that makes you sometimes become a better photographer. And this was this is classic M6 35 millimeter Tri-X.
And Michael, how about your picture?
This is one that I made in Venezuela, and this was made last year, and I was doing a series of trips to Venezuela because we were able to get visas, which is not easy in Venezuela, especially a journalism visa. So this is in Maracaibo, and Maracaibo is the second largest city in the country, and Maracaibo used to be this prosperous gem in Venezuela. It's the epicenter of the oil production area on Lake Maracaibo. There used to be nonstop direct flights to Europe. It was, you know, has this spectacular modern art museum, great infrastructure, and now it is completely collapsed. And so what we're looking at here is in a neighborhood, and this is a school bus. This is used as a school bus to get kids to school. So it's a station wagon with no windows, and they do what they can to keep it running. And this was a photograph I made using the Leica Q. And it was just a matter of, yes, with the rangefinder and layering, when we're talking about layering as part of a story, it is those intricacies of creating, small frames within a larger frame. So you see something happening in the right corner, the spare tire leaning against the pole on the left, the guy filling the other tire with air. So lots of things happening within the frame with focus front to back. So that's kind of what I was doing on this photograph. And I think when I'm making pictures for a story, I'm thinking about a lot of things about, okay, I have to avoid redundancy through the story. So I'm taking a variety of pictures. Some are going to have shallow depth of field because that's what the image calls for. That's what I feel my interpretation of that situation is. Shallow depth of field will make it a better photograph. And then others, it's like, no, this one I want to have people drawn into the photo and to look at it longer. And they become elements of the story at the end. Will this help? Will this transition? What will this do within a story? So that was kind of the thinking behind this frame right here.
Another point, you can't work in photojournalism and not think of Robert Capa, I suppose, in terms of this idea of getting close. But how important is that to you? These two examples, Hector?
Well, I mean, to me, it's once again, it's about emotion, right? And you want to capture the emotion of what's going on. Like there's people protesting, and then there's this policeman in front of you, and the power, the power dynamics in these two groups, and the people watching it. Because I'm standing there just as close as everybody else, because I'm not the only person there. Obviously, there's all these people here, and the way that cop looks at me, there's just a look, and we all been looked at that way. It just tells you so much. And the woman behind it, she just has this power. She's just gonna protest, and that guy's just looking at me like, a little bit of a challenge, right? And it feels like when you're standing, like it's so much, once again, it's about the emotion and feeling of it, but also not distract from the main story, which is the protest and the power of the protester, right?
Very good. And Michael, how about this? This is a project called the 5-Day War.
Yeah, so this was a story about the Russia-Georgia war that happened in 2008, and it was I flew there from Los Angeles. I was working for the Los Angeles Times, and this was actually on the first day when we were there on a highway leading from Gori to Tbilisi, and these were people being evacuated from the battle zone. And so this was a situation where I landed there. I was working with other photographers, much like what Hector and I were talking about before. I was working with Ron Haviv and Jared Musi and the late, great Chris Hondros. We were all working together. We came upon this scene, and it's true. If you're making a picture, and it's something that Hector and I talk to our students about, take a big step closer. Don't zoom in with the ring, zoom in with your feet. Walk closer, do the dance, get in there. And so this was a situation where they were in the back of the truck, and I just wanted to make sure I got nice and close, because the story was in their faces, their fear, the tension, the uncertainty of where their lives were going, their homes destroyed or occupied. So I felt that I needed to get kind of close, and I took a page from Hector's motion book. When I made this frame, I lowered my shutter speed, because that motion I felt could add a little bit of tension, right? It could add some tension to it, and that's what I wanted.
Well, that image of yours, you're in the picture. That's what I mean. To me, that's like you're in the truck. Clearly, you're in there.
That's
and
exactly
and
like
the tense, the truck is moving. Everybody's like, every element of that picture brings you in. That's what it was like to be in the truck.
I encourage everyone to check out your websites. We'll list that at the end there, because these elements we're talking about, layering, getting close, and now this conversation about motion, especially with you, Hector, could you talk about that? That shows up again and again on your website.
Yeah, I mean, I believe that, I also photograph a lot, sort of like in the dusk and nighttime, so like it's natural emotion comes on, but I believe that movement is such a, like photography doesn't have to be still, even though it's a still image. I believe in motion. I think that is part of life. And so I try to, whenever I can convey the emotion of a scene. In this picture that you're showing here on the right side, I was at a festival, and I was shooting with this camera called the very wide 100. I think it's made for architecture back in the 60s. It's medium format, not quite panoramic, but it's a 21. Maximum aperture is f8. So I knew it was gonna be blurry. But I could see these women dancing and spinning around, and I'm like, if it works out, it was once again film, and it works out, it could be great. But I had no idea, but I did want to convey the feeling of this festival, and there's nothing like it.
Michael, this is a picture you made in Mexico?
Yes, this is similar to what you were I was talking about on the 2008 Georgia War. This was a story in Mexico about the cartel areas. And for a year in 2017, I worked with a reporter going down repeatedly to Mexico. He was based in Mexico City. And we went to Guerrero, we went to Jalisco and Tijuana to do a story about how the cartels and the drug wars and everything in Mexico, how it was kind of ripping the country to pieces, right? Internal consumption, the problems that Mexico was enduring. And this is in Acapulco, which is at that time was the most violent city in Mexico. It was no longer the nice beach resort town that people wanted to go on vacation. And this is in an area called Colonia Santa Cruz. And we had just gone to a homicide scene here. And as we were leaving, this is from inside the car, and the windshield was cracked in the car. So I looked through the windshield, and all these lines, like these diagonal lines, which are powerful, right? I mean, they add tension. Hitchcock used them to great effect in making suspense films, those strong diagonal lines. And so I looked through this, and I wanted people to understand, okay, this is a dangerous neighborhood. And I wanted to give them that feeling that there's some unease in being in this neighborhood. Night's falling, not a good time to be there. It is dangerous for the people who have to live there day to day. And so that's why I shot this frame through the windshield and using all of these lines. And then of course the cross in the middle of it is just
the cross, and also all the VW bugs.
Yeah, all the VW bugs. It's like, you're in Mexico.
Yeah, I mean, that to me is like.
Well, I'm going to jump here just in terms of packing in a number of questions and ideas. The last one in terms of photo elements is the portrait. And I know you both have some interesting contrasting story in
right.
the backstory for either one of these. Let me see what I've got.
Right. And we go ahead. I mean, sometimes we travel, we do all this stuff, but sometimes images just, things just come in front of you. I was at a party in New York at my sister-in-law's place, and this is my niece. And, it was just like a family party, and I was like just walking around, and she was happy to be standing in front of this light, and I just grabbed my camera, I took 2 pictures of her. And that was it. It was like, it was just one of those moments, and it's unusual for me because normally I don't take pictures randomly. Almost, to me, every picture has to belong to a story. Like, I don't just, I'm not a big, just single images.
Well, I'm glad
it was a party, so I brought my camera because it was a party, and and I'm like, oh, I'll take some pictures, it'll be fun.
Yeah,
and they just happened to come up. And I was just like, and yeah, clearly my niece has this look to it. She was looking at me going like, what are you doing? Probably like,
Who looks at you like that?
Everybody looks at me like that.
It's definitely a niece.
But sometimes like pictures are everywhere, right? Like you don't know, but. And this moment was special because I did know them, and it was easier for me to be able to do it.
Let me jump back here, guys. Details, another thing often overlooked.
Yeah, details are important elements in stories, and they don't necessarily always get used in a story, but I think it's really wonderful to have these kind of telling moments, because we can look and learn a lot about people. And we were talking about before, like our photographs are populated with people. We have a lot of that going on. But you tell a lot about a community by something like this. This is this wonderful dried fish they have in Siberia. Oh, it was so good. The stuff was delicious. And everyone's homes have this. So you look at this, and this is a good indicator of where you are in the world. And so within a story, it helps break up that narrative and gives you that nice detail or that telling image that you don't necessarily need to have with a face or people in it. And plus it makes me hungry. So I've always liked it.
Well, and actually one more before we talk about your recent work and how you've been working in this time of COVID. And this is, again, something I think is often overlooked, the quiet or transitional moment. This is a project, Hector, you did on siblings.
This is a story I did for the Washingtonian magazine about a twin brother and sister that both had autism. So it was, it's a complicated story because I also didn't want to, put any extra stress on the kids, So I wanted to both step back to be able to give them room. I didn't want to intrude in their lives. But also, like the picture on the right, the little boy, during break at school, he couldn't deal with people. So he would just, while everybody else took break, he would come in and play by himself. So there was also trying to show that part of sometimes life is just it's lonely and it's difficult. But also you don't always have to go in deep. Sometimes you have to step back and let images. So also depending of the, once again, it's about
Subject matter.
capturing the emotion. You know, this is like, if I want to capture the emotion of these kids, I had to step back and also not to stress. You also have to remember that people live lives, so you can't put them into undue stress because you're there. They're already, most of the people we photograph, unfortunately, like are already under stress.
Well, it's certainly been an extraordinary time worldwide in terms of stress, and you guys are no amateurs at covering stressful situations. But you have both been in the last several months at home in the greater Washington, D.C. area. Hector, can you share the story behind this picture?
Right. So when the COVID first, you know, like they first broke out, and this is like when DC started to do a stay-at-home rule or suggestion, whatever you want to call it, I decided, well, I don't really know what to do. So this is like a set of pictures that I take two blocks from my house in the main intersection of a very busy neighborhood, and I decided I will take a picture every day at the same time, just to see if there's any changes. You know, what would happen? You know, in some pictures you can see people starting wearing masks, and it little changes, but like I just wanted to do a simple project. I didn't want to, like, you know, because I still didn't know how to stay safe. Like you also have to, you know, it's part of being safe and part of all these things. But I knew I wanted to go out and take some pictures. So I did a very simple project that, so once again, it's an idea. You don't have to, projects don't have to be the most complex things in the world. You don't have to travel. Like, you know, this is 2 blocks away from my house, 3:30 p.m. every day. I stand in the same place. And the people around me are starting to get to know me. You know, when I woke up, they're like, oh, sometimes I miss a day. They're like, where were you? We're worried. You know, like.
And Michael, you could share, I know it's been an incredibly busy time between covering COVID for the Washington Post and the Black Lives Matter protests. Can you share, I'm going to click through these and talk to us about what the approach has been.
Yeah, so it has been. I mean, this year has just been brutal for so many people in so many different ways. This is a photographic project that I've been working on about a county, Prince George's County and Baltimore, Maryland, here in the state of Maryland, that have been really affected. And primarily it has been the Latinx and African-American communities that have really endured the burden of COVID, this COVID pandemic, in terms of number of cases, deaths. And so this is a series of photographs that I'm working currently on for a larger project in these areas about African-American community, these in particular, and how they're dealing with it and what their everyday lives are like. And I didn't want it to just be about, oh, suffering and how horrible it is. There were celebrations, but as you can see here, this was a funeral for a bishop in one particular city who was beloved by the town, and he was a giant in this community. And so they had a formal funeral for him. But then at the graveside, only 10 people were allowed to be there. No one else could be there because of the COVID restrictions. But life is going on in its weird, strange way for everybody, as they know. And so I also wanted to include graduations. These are food lines. I mean, economically, it's not just the pandemic, but economically, everyone's taking an incredible hit here. And so food lines have now, food banks have become an everyday experience for people to line up and get the food that they need. This is the Arabers in Baltimore who bring horse-drawn carriages that were usually loaded with produce for sale, and now they're being loaded with food to give away to seniors and people in need. So the community's really rallying together to help each other out. And so these are all important elements of the story. And now with the backdrop of the Black Lives Matter movement and the horrible killings that have gone on with police killing unarmed people, it's like just exploded, and it's become a much more intense story and a broader story. And that's where you have to be able to pivot. You have to be able to realize that the story sometimes dictates what you're covering. Right. How is it going to change?
This comes from a question of a listener. I'm gonna phrase it a little bit differently. Michael, you started to take pictures before your trips to Peru. You started to take pictures surf photography. Is that right?
Yeah. Primarily when I got introduced to photography, a friend gave me a camera before a trip to Peru. And he was a friend of mine who's a photographer for this company, and I was driving a forklift for the company. It was just a job I had out of school. And I went to Peru with this Canon AE1 in the instruction manual and a bag full of color film. And then I was doing a lot of surfing. So I had a water housing, and I was going out and taking surf pictures and pictures of people. And I fell in love with travel and photography on that trip. And
so I asked that history because I found, I haven't been, I used to surf. I like to still think that I surf, but that's in fact, I haven't been in the water for more than a year. But, once you are a surfer, you're a surfer. And what I mean by that is because you're looking at a wave and you're imagining yourself on it, no matter how
all the
small or
time.
big it is, right?
Yeah.
But I give you guys that history to ask, how did you know, when did you know you were both photographers?
I mean, my story is kind of bizarre. Like I was in grad school, I was working toward a PhD in physics. And I grew up with photography, you know, like I mentioned, I think in yesterday's talk, my father always had cameras because he was more like a hobby, because he was an engineer. He just loved like a Leica R3, he had a Leica R3, and he loved the engineering of it. But, you know, when I was in grad school, I started taking pictures just a little bit to take time off from, you know, the constant working and studying and stuff. So like I was doing landscapes and all this stuff, but it was getting expensive because film was expensive. So one of my classmates said, hey, why don't you join the school newspaper? They give you free film and they have cameras. So I started shooting, and then I started thinking of just, you know, I went in just to get free film. Next thing you know, I'm doing every story. They're like like, oh, we have a portrait, we have an interview, we have like, you know, and also like everybody in my university, I went to Virginia Tech, everybody wanted to shoot sports. And I was like, yeah, I don't really want to shoot that. So I started doing all the little stories. Oh, there's a farmer on the corner who grows this weird thing. So it's a scientist making a robot. I'm like, I'll shoot that. You know, and I started with that. I started looking more books, and I started looking at documentary photography, and I saw some magazine work with Salgado. And it really struck me looking at the pictures of Latin America, somebody who had been from, you know, is from Latin America. So at some point I just decided, you know what, I'm just going to leave school and with my M42 and try to become a documentary photographer. That's not how my career went around, because I started shooting for small newspapers and things. But that was sort of like I had to make a big decision to drop everything that I was doing to sort of do this.
But Hector, I want to go back to the picture of your niece, and you mentioned you don't normally shoot family life and every day. Is that right, or do you?
Yeah,
always
no,
have a
I
camera
don't.
with
You know, I feel like I'm not one of those people that usually walks around with a camera. Sometimes now with the phone, I guess probably do more. But like you know, there's a quote from Ralph Gibson, which I don't remember, but it's like something about every image has to be part of a ongoing project. Otherwise, you just have a box of pictures or something. You know, like you don't have a body of work; you have a box of pictures, and I do believe my work in general has to be like I go out with a purpose, almost like whenever I go out with a camera, I have a bit of a purpose.
And Michael, for you, if it's not an assignment, if you're not, you know, not an ongoing project or an assignment from Washington Post, do you have a camera? Are you always looking?
Yeah, I mean, I have my phone with me, you know, and it's, you know, this is what I'm using, and I have a 10-year-old now. It's her birthday today. I have a 10-year-old, so of course I'm like taking pictures because I'm taking pictures of her. But yeah, also I feel that, you know, I'm full-time staff photographer, so I'm working all the time. I make so many photographs just 5 days a week and longer if I'm on a trip like a 7-day-a-week trip, sort of Siberia, where you never stop making pictures, you never stop working. So for me, it's kind of like I want to be able to capture these little moments and things, and so I'll just use the phone for that. And occasionally I'll take out the Q, and the Q is a joy to work with that way too, because it's so light.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate the coming back to the gear. That's good, guys. Thank you. But, you know, to close this out here, I asked you both to share a recent favorite image. And let's see what our first one is here. Hector.
Right. So this is that when you show that contact sheet with the spot that I shoot every day at 3:30, this is where I shoot it from. So I was just there waiting for my 3:30 picture. And this happens to be the lobby of that's a bizarre thing. It's a bank on the side, and this kid's mother was waiting online for the bank, and I'm just waiting, you know, with my, once again, gear on my Leica with, you know, and this kid was just playing, and you know, and I kept on trying to say, like, I'm gonna take this picture, but I kept on looking at him, and there's, you know, and to me, it was just this sense of, he has this shirt that says legend, and he's wearing a mask, and, you know, he's a Latinx kid, and it also goes with my American X project about Latinos in the U.S. And I don't know, I found it was like a positive, powerful image, you know, considering everything that's going on in the world right now. So that's why I liked it. It was just something that really stuck in my mind, and it came, you know, I was shooting something else, but that doesn't mean I'm not going to look around.
Sure.
But once again, it is part of a bigger project. So also, it's not like it was completely separate.
But for you, Hector, this is a question for both of you. We're going to move on to Michael's picture. Do you know it's a project ahead of time, or you find it out after the fact? What happens more often than not?
Well, for me, it's because if I tend to work on long projects, I have to think about them before I start on them, right? So And that doesn't mean they're going to stay. They want, they could change with time because like I'm, but I do come up with a project and I sort of start to stick with that.
And Michael, I imagine as an assignment, it's a project, but are there things that come out of looking back at your work that you didn't know would be a project?
Yeah. I mean, it's usually, stories for me, many of them are not, I don't even think of as projects because it's just a daily. I'm shooting something for the day. It's going to be in the paper the next day or online in 4 hours. So I'm just shooting it real quickly. But then, yes, you'll find something and then I can talk to my editors. I can say, hey, I went on this thing, but I think I'm going to need a little bit more time because I think there's something deeper here. This family has more to say, or this person has more to say. I think visually we can flesh this out better than what the word side thinks, we can crank out in a day. And then they'll go and battle for the time and pushing the deadlines back. And then I pitch a lot of my own stories. For example, this picture right here is from that larger package I was talking to you about. And I'm still, this one, I just like the image in black and white. And since it was being presented as a single, I wanted to look at it in black and white. And this is a Latino family that had just gone to a food giveaway. They have the food. They're waiting for the bus because they have to take public transportation to get to where they're going. And it really speaks to what a lot of the challenges people have during the COVID pandemic, that they can't get in a car and then just go wait in line, or they, sheltering at home isn't so easy. They have to go out and do all these things and be out in the community running the risks with their families to get food on the table. So this, I knew I pitched this as an idea to be a larger project. And fortunately, the Post is really receptive to my pitches, and we've had good success so far.
I think it's a really good example of something you both do in terms of showing family relationships and it's the generational impact of a lot of your ongoing stories certainly comes through here. And I want to make sure that people know how to stay in touch with you. We've packed a lot in this amount of time we have here. Yeah. Your Instagram information is up there. To be frank, to have just one of you would have been a great interview. To have both of you is an absolute treat. And I would submit to everyone that our upcoming workshop also is a rare opportunity to have the balance of perspective from a staff photographer at the Washington Post and a long-term documentary photographer together. It's a rare thing. We're going to open it to only 10 spots plus one scholarship position. The deadline to apply for that at the email below, academy@Leica Camera USA, is July 10th. So portfolio, give us a little blurb on why you would like to be considered for the program, and we will announce a winner. The instructors will select a winner for the program. Guys, any final words?
We'd love to see you at the workshop and join us. It'll be great. But more importantly, for those of you that are, feeling a little claustrophobic and at home and want to go make photographs nearby, it's a time to dig deep and really just kind of explore what's close around you. I mean, that marvelous work that Hector's doing, that's only a couple blocks from his house. It's time to get out of your comfort zone of maybe what you're normally shooting and start exploring. And
it's always a good way. Like it's we're going through all this stuff. We're all going through different things, but it's a good way to sort of distance yourself and think about something else. Because once you have a challenge, then it's a way to think, go out of your comfort zone, but also just think about all the other terrible stuff that's happening and concentrate on something else.
Yeah, something that's soothing and therapeutic.
All right, gentlemen, I'd be remiss, the audience is pinging me here. I'd be remiss if I didn't have you answer our classic question, which is, what's your desert island camera and lens? I
think we already answered that one, didn't we? For me, it would be the M6 and the 35-1.4. Yeah.
For me, like some M, this is the M type 240, but if you guys wanted to give me an M10, of course I take it.
Yeah.
But this is I have had this 35 millimeters since I think mid 90s, and whatever camera this would fit, that's what I'm shooting with.
The Q2 is also a good one.
Guys, it's been a pleasure, and I hope to get to see you in person before too long.
Yeah, hopefully.
Yeah. For everybody at home that's been listening, thank you, and we will see you next time. Stay home with Leica.
Be safe, everyone.
Take care.